Good afternoon, conference. Welcome to Tuesday afternoon. Our first item of business this afternoon is item F37, which is the emergency motion holding banks to account. You'll find this on page 8 of your conference daily for today. We have received notice of a separate vote, and I'll give you the details of that now, so that anyone wishing to speak on the separate vote, which is on lines 26 to 28 of the motion, it gives you the chance to submit a speaker's card if you so wish. Could I ask Lisa Smart from Hazel Grove to please stand by? And it gives me great pleasure to invite on stage to move the motion Dr. Pratik Bush from Chingford and Woodford Green.
Thanks, Chair. Conference, this simple but important motion seeks to hold some of our most powerful people in society to account. And it sets out 3 clear principles that we as a party might well be united on, but they bear repeating and emphasising so that the coalition can put them into practice. And the first principle is that where individual bankers and their institutions are suspected of wrongdoing, they feel the full force of the law. Sadly, it looks like we're going to need the resources for the Serious Fraud Office and the FSA that this motion calls for more regularly, because it's highly unlikely that Barclays will be found to be the only institution to have manipulated LIBOR lending rates. And in fact, the manipulation of these rates is in itself unlikely to be the only scandal that proper investigations into the banking sector would unearth. Whether it's money laundering, the excessive bonus culture, or sharp lending practices, it is absolutely crucial that the authorities are given the necessary tools to keep the banking sector within both the spirit and the letter of the law. The second principle that the motion speaks to is the fact that fining bankers and their banks for corrupt practices once they've happened simply isn't enough. We've got to ensure that through the weekly review and the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards, that we get the setting of LIBOR right and that we embed wider professional ethics into the city's culture. And we need to do so because we just can't allow bankers to expose the wider economy to huge unpredictable risk, to build up ridiculous personal rewards on the back of the risky gambles that they take, and then be let off the hook when their perverse incentive structure leads them beyond the realms of decency into breaking the law. Now, the third principle is that the banking sector shouldn't just operate within the law. It's not a particularly high bar to set for such a powerful service. The motion calls for banks to be effective as well as ethical and supportive of the productive economy. Now, of course, we want banks that we currently have, that currently exist, including the banks that we own, to lend more and to do so at affordable rates. Of course, we want them to stop holding back the economic recovery and to use funding for lending schemes to get businesses moving. But in line 24 and 25 of the motion, the motion calls for transparent and fair lending practices and sort of name checks the Sustainable Prosperity paper that we debated earlier in conference. And you'll remember that that paper called for the creation of a more competitive banking sector with a diversity of ownership and remit in a flexible regulatory landscape that allows market entry. We need public banks, we need local banks, co-ops, credit unions, microfinance institutions. We need a really rich and diverse banking ecosystem as opposed to the sclerotic, centralised disaster of a financial services sector we have today. Now, as Chair's just mentioned, there is a separate vote on the final element of the paper, which was aimed really just to simply call on Lib Dem MPs to support people who have been refused credit. Now, the call on the motion isn't exactly a compulsion, and I'm sure our MPs can exercise discretion. So I'm personally quite relaxed about that sort of separate vote. But there is, of course, a broader political point that I'd like to end on. This motion calls for an effective, ethical banking sector. Can you imagine either Labour or Tories calling for this with any credibility? Can you imagine the Tory party, who are still wedded to their city funders, calling for these reforms? I don't think so. Can you imagine Labour Party, who share so much culpability for the scandals I've just mentioned, asking for these reforms? I don't think so. It's Stephen, Danny, Vince, Baroness Kramer, all of these people, they're the Lib Dems in government who are going to make these reforms happen. So please support this motion and make sure that we do fix our banking system.
Pratik, thank you very much. Could I ask Tessa Munt from Wells to stand by, please? And I now call Lisa Smart from Hazel Grove, who's going to move the separate vote.
Thank you. I think this is an excellent motion, but there's one thing I'd like to draw